Thank you for the kind introductions. It's great to be here. As he said, my name is Josh Lockhart. I'm a web developer at a agency called New Media Campaigns. We are in a very small town in North Carolina in the United States called Carborough, just outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, if you're familiar with that. But I wanted to say thank you to the conference organizers, to Sam and Ronald for having me out. It's an honor to be here. And thank you to all of you for coming out to see me speak today. I'm not a professional speaker by any means, but I was really honored to come out here. My wife Laurel and I traveled literally halfway around the world to come out here and talk today and to visit this really beautiful country. And so as Ronald had said, I want to talk a little bit more about more than code, and specifically how you can become a better developer as a result. And this is really based on some lessons that I've learned through my career that I'll talk about. And I wanted to really share those with you, and hopefully they can help you as well. So I want to introduce myself first. My name is Josh Lockhart. You may have seen me on Twitter at CodeGuy. If you like a healthy dose of sarcasm and some politics and a little bit of PHP, follow me on Twitter. And I hope most of you have also heard of this book I wrote called Modern PHP. A really nice editor at O'Reilly approached me a few years ago and asked me if I would be interested in writing a book for them. I was like, heck yes, for sure. I mean, he's going to say no. At the time, O'Reilly didn't necessarily have a book that had a lot of the more modern techniques and practices in PHP. So I was really had a great time writing this, and writing a book is hard. I don't know if I'll do it again, but it has a lot of great information about PHP and the modern techniques and everything that I would want you to know, specifically about code is in this book. So if you get a chance, definitely pick this up. I think you'll really enjoy it. And next, you've probably heard of the Slim framework. Slim framework is true to its name. It's a micro framework for PHP. I wrote this to solve a lot of my own problems at my day job at New Media Campaigns. Back in 2011, a lot of my job responsibilities was kind of building smaller APIs that consumed information from remote services and kind of stored it and transformed it and then republished it in a variety of formats. And at the time, I of course had some of the bigger full stack frameworks at my disposal. For example, Symfony or CodeIgniter, things along those lines. But those are, like I said, those are full stack frameworks. They have a lot of big code footprint. They require a lot of mental overhead as far as a learning curve. And I just didn't have the time really to kind of adopt one of those larger systems. And they were honestly a bit overkill for what I was trying to do. So I kind of explored my own solutions at work and started piecing together Slim. It was inspired by, if any of you are familiar with Ruby, the Sinatra framework from Rubyland. Was very inspired by that, and I wanted to kind of transfer a lot of its ideals and principles to something in PHP. And so I started the Slim framework in 2011. And that's largely why I created it, again, was to solve a lot of my own problems. And I'm really happy to see that it has become very widely adopted by developers around the world. And I was also lucky to have a great team behind me on that as well. I definitely want to give a shout out to Andrew Smith at SilentWorks on Twitter. He's been with the Slim framework since version 1, and he's been an invaluable developer on the project. And recently with version 3, we've been fortunate to have Rob Allen come on board, and you may have heard of him from the Zen framework community. Both of them have been awesome, a great big help on the project. And I just want to say thank you to them. And last, PHP The Right Way is probably the one project I'm most proud about. PHP The Right Way, if you haven't heard about it already, you really should check it out. It is a single resource that aggregates a lot of the current best information and most importantly, most up-to-date information in the PHP community. I started this a few years back. At the time, I was trying to find some information for myself and for my coworkers about PHP, and the information was really kind of fragmented all over the place. And of course, I went to Google and I was searching around for some information about PHP, and a lot of that, as you might expect, was a little outdated. So instead, I had this idea on the way to lunch one day, and I was with my coworker Clay, and I said, "Clay, this is going to be big. This is going to be big." And so I put together a really simple website to get going, and I kind of seeded it with the initial kind of information. But I'm very proud and excited how it has basically exploded into this really popular community-driven initiative. We've had tons and tons of contributors from around the world, not just me. I would love to take credit for this whole site, but I can't. I've contributed a little bit of information to it, but what I did was, for the sections on this site, even I learned from, that I wasn't necessarily an expert in, like testing, for example. Right? I approached some of the more authoritative figures in the PHP community. So for testing, I went straight to Sebastian Bergman. I believe you may have helped with the project a little bit. Grumpy Programmer. If any of you have heard of him, I went to him, and he was happy to kind of lend his expertise and knowledge. So it's not just me. It's a lot of the more authoritative figures in PHP who've kind of contributed their knowledge and time to this single resource. So I really encourage you, if you haven't already, please go here and check it out. I use it as a reference every day. Share it with your friends, share it with your coworkers. It's a great resource. So why necessarily should you listen to me? You know, why am I up here, right? I'm a web developer. That's what I do every day. I just write code. So I've had a pretty short but great career so far. I started in the year 2000, and this is when I really started learning PHP. At the time, I was of course already writing, flat HTML and CSS, but that can only really take you so far. And so at that time, I really got an interest in going further. I wanted to explore user login systems and database integration, things you just could not do yet with just flat HTML client side. So I went to my local bookstore, Barnes & Noble in the United States, and I found this book called PHP and MySQL Web Development by Laura Thompson and Luke Welling, and it was an earlier edition. And I read it from cover to cover, and I just kind of started teaching myself PHP, and that's how I really got going. And next, in 2003, I was pretty much done with high school in the United States, and I started a freelance career. And this was a really good opportunity for me to get some real-world experience, start building some money, working with clients face-to-face, which was a whole different set of experience that I was able to gather. And in 2007, this is when I actually joined New Media Campaigns. This is right when I graduated college, and luckily I met the founder of New Media, and I was one of the earliest employees. And this gave me a lot of good agency experience. It's a lot different than freelance, but it was great to join this team, and I'm proud to still be a part of New Media Campaigns as their technical lead in-house. And in 2011, I created the Slim framework. I started it, and it has since grown to what it is now, a worldwide, one of the more popular micro frameworks. But most importantly, it has given me the opportunity to get really in-depth experience with open source software development, and that is it comes with the good things and the bad things with open source. The good things, I got to work directly with the community as a whole. I got to work with some great team members on the project. I really got to dive deep into how open source software development works. But then you also get experience with the downsides of open source, and that's largely the negativity that comes from kind of the trolls or what have you from the community. And so you just learn how to cope and how to keep moving with software development. And also for the Slim framework, before I move on, I've got plenty of stickers if you want to meet me after in the QA session later. So, but today I'm proud to call myself a published author with O'Reilly Media with Modern PHP. and I'm proud to be a team leader at work, both at my day job and with several open source projects. But today, I don't necessarily want to talk about PHP. I don't want to talk about PHP specifically. If you met me at the coffee shop and you were like, Josh, please just give me all of your wisdom about PHP, I would send you to these two resources, right? So Modern PHP, if I had to dump all of my knowledge about PHP and the best practices that I wanted you to do, I would tell you to read this book. And if you had questions about where to find certain information about some cool techniques or community projects, I would send you to PHP The Right Way. But today I really want to explore some more intangible lessons. I want to talk about you as a developer. I want to talk about me as a developer and how all us developers and how we can become better kind of at what we do. And this is by exploring several lessons that I've learned through my career, from just opening a book and teaching myself PHP to freelance to an agency to open source to today. And these are more intangible lessons that you can't necessarily just read out of a book. You really have to experience them over time, experience and often multiple time failures. And so I've learned a lot of these lessons, and these lessons really revolve around this one question, and I hear this a lot: is how do I become a senior developer? All right, and I really dislike this term. But for lack of a better term, I'm going to use it today. But I hear this question a lot. I hear this question at user groups where we're in Chapel Hill, the user group that I run. I hear this at conferences. I hear this online. So what exactly is a senior developer? Does it imply that you have a lot of knowledge and skills that you bring to the table? Well, maybe, right? Maybe you're the oldest person at your company. You have a lot of seniority. You've been around the longest. You're a senior developer, right? Maybe, yeah. Or maybe it's your job title, right? Josh Lockhart, senior developer. Maybe, right? Probably not, but maybe. But the point is, I don't know. I don't know what a senior developer is, but what I can do and why I'm here today is to kind of share some of these lessons I've learned as I've become a better and better programmer, as I still am becoming a better and better programmer. These are the lessons I've learned that have really helped me get to where I am today. Number one is it's important to understand that PHP is only a tool. Okay, your job as a developer is to solve problems, and PHP is an excellent tool, but it's only one tool at your disposal. Two, you should work smart, not hard. This is a favorite of mine. I try and practice this every day. And this is probably the most important one. And I can't stress this enough, and I'll talk more about this in detail later. But your people, your team, are your best assets. They really and truly are. You should take care of them and help them become better. And I'll talk about how you can do that. Number four, keep it simple. All right, this is kind of a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And this applies directly to the code that you write, and I'll explore that. And last is sharing your knowledge. All right, that's why I'm here today. All right, it's one of the most important things you can do, not only to support yourself. I think by sharing your knowledge, you actually teach yourself. I've taught myself a lot by sharing knowledge through the various projects that I've been a part of. But you can also help others, help your team, help your community, help your user group by doing this. So let's start with lesson number one. All right, PHP is only a tool. And to start with, I really want to stress the importance of using the right tool for the job. You don't want to really devote yourself to a single tool when you're building solutions to problems that your clients bring to you. One thing I've witnessed at my job and other local developers back in North Carolina is that when they're beginning PHP or even intermediate PHP developers, they tend to start learning PHP with a full stack framework like Laravel, for example. And I'll pick on Laravel a little bit, but Laravel is an awesome piece of software. It's really well built. It's super easy to learn. And it's great that it helps a lot of PHP developers quickly get started and learn how to write really good PHP code. But what I don't like about that is that at least some of the developers that I've witnessed, and something I encourage you not to do, is to continue relying on the same tool for every single problem that you are faced with. Be aware of that other tools actually exist, and that they may be better suited for certain tasks. Now, Laravel may be the right choice for certain problems if you need a more conventional approach to things, but know that other things exist, like micro frameworks or individual PHP components. These are also tools at your disposal. So like I said, I pick on Laravel, but I can pick on myself too. So when I was at New Media Campaigns, back when I was writing Slim in 2011, 2012, this was around version 1, version 2 of Slim. I was guilty of this. For a lot of the projects that came in the door, I was like, oh, Slim could be perfect for this. Slim will do this. And honestly, it was an opportunity for me to really put Slim through its paces, to kind of see what it was good at, what it wasn't good at, and see how I can improve it. So in that regards, it was helpful for me as the author of the framework, but in hindsight, some of these projects that I used would have benefited from a more Laravel type approach, where it was more conventional from the get-go. This is your file system structure, this is what it should be, this is how your class name should be. You had some expectations starting out. Whereas Slim is a more free-form, unconventional approach that really gives you the bare necessities and otherwise steps out of the way. So know that these different solutions exist. So if you need a macro framework, if you need a more conventional approach, if you need a lot of tools that are immediately available to you, Laravel, Symfony, Cake, CodeIgniter, these are all excellent options. But also know that, if you're building a smaller API or a smaller web application, look at Slim, look at Lumen, look at Silex, right? These are more unconventional, smaller tool sets that don't have the large code footprint, that don't have quite the size of the cognitive overhead that comes with the full stack frameworks. And even then, maybe you need to kind of custom build together your own solutions, explore the underlying components. Full stack frameworks, micro frameworks, they're all built on these same underlying PHP components that you can pick and choose and shop for individually on Packagist and install them into your project with Composer. So here's yours truly, right here. My lovely wife down here, Laurel, took these photos. We love photography. It's a really fun hobby that lets us get outside sometimes. And on my right, you'll see me with my Canon 5D and 70-200 f2.8, my favorite kit. All right. And on the other side, you've got a quite smaller kit. It's my Fuji X-T10 with the 56 1.2. Different tools for drastically different jobs, right? So I love the 70-200. I'll take that out for wildlife and sports, but I'm not going to take that to a birthday party or to a family get together, right? It's a little overkill. That's when I'd probably lean more towards the Fuji kit. So the point here is to pick and choose your tools and use the right tool for the right job. Okay. Mm-hmm. So just like we have multiple frameworks, macro frameworks, micro frameworks, and even individual components, all right, remember that PHP is only one language, all right? When I do projects at New Media Campaigns, I remember, as a team leader, it's my job to ultimately solve the problem. It's not my job to just rely on a single tool to do so, all right? So PHP is just one language that I use. Right? It's very easy to complement PHP. I rely on PHP for most of what I do, but when I have certain repetitive tasks, maintenance tasks, like for CMSs like Drupal that we use, or when I'm building kind of worker threads that are asynchronous from the main PHP script, I'll often drop down to just plain Bash or Ruby to do these things. So remember that PHP is just one part of the solution, right? Your job as a senior developer, as you're becoming better and better, is to figure out how you can solve the problem And whether or not PHP is a part of that or not is up to you. Now, if you really love PHP, it's really cool that you can still use PHP as the command line, in the command line context. It supports standard in, standard out, and standard error like most Unix programs. So that's really neat, right? Now, lesson number 2 is you should really work smarter, all right, not harder, all right? And the first thing about that is not reinventing the wheel, okay? So, like I said, I've seen many beginning and intermediate PHP programmers, they'll really favor looking at the newer, shiny new technologies that are coming out, and they prefer to kind of use those to build their solutions. And I would caution against that. You should really try and avoid reinventing the wheel. And I guarantee you, when you are building an application with PHP, you'll run into a lot of common problems that have already been solved. A vast majority of these problems have already been solved. And it's super easy to just go on packages.org and just shop around for the components that you need, and you can kind of build your own custom solutions. So for example, if I needed to create an HTTP request and response library, I wouldn't worry about trying to build my own. I'd just go install Guzzle from Packages and carry on with my way, all right? So, and this also applies not just to PHP components or frameworks, but there's other larger solutions that you can explore as well. So at New Media Campaigns, we do a lot of CMS work, and we tend to favor Drupal. Drupal is a very, very complex piece of software, but it's very powerful. And once you learn how to use it well, it can be a great tool. So one example is we had a client a few years back, and it was a scholarship foundation in North Carolina. And they were currently managing all of their scholarship information, like who their funders were, how much money was being provided, when it was available, when applications that from students would be accepted. All of this type of information they were trying to manage with local Excel spreadsheets. And that doesn't scale very well. They approached us to kind of help them build a solution that they could manage this online with multiple users kind of logging in and contributing to the information, and then integrating that information with a front-end website. So, I talked with a coworker, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we could pull down Symfony, and we could build out these controllers, and we could define our models, and we can build these CRUD style views like with create, update, and delete functionality." And I was like, well, we do build a lot of Drupal websites. That seems like an excellent tool that we could just use as it is. So we installed Drupal, and that gives us like the really advanced user login system that can access control lists, tons of permissions. We can define our own content types and custom fields, and most importantly, the client can log into their own accounts and manage all of this information really easily. Right? We didn't have to do anything other than just install Drupal and configure a few settings. And then we use the views module to expose this information in JSON format, which we then pulled into the front end of the other website where the students could actually access this and search for scholarships. So that's just one example. Like, you should be aware of the tools that are out there, and you should try and avoid reinventing the wheel when solutions already exist. So believe it or not, I do not work because I love PHP. I really like PHP, but that's not why I work. All right. The reason I work is so I can make money, all right, and I can go home and enjoy my life. All right, that's really important to me. And how I do that is I maintain a really healthy work-life balance. That's something that I encourage all of you to strive toward. So I come into work at 9 a.m. I do my job as best I can until 5 p.m. and then I kind of shut down and go home. Spend time with Laurel and my dogs. Go walk, do photography, get outside, away from the keyboard. So I can't necessarily speak to the culture of work here in Taiwan. I'm not familiar with it, but I can speak to the culture of work in the United States. And unfortunately, the work culture there is really heavily focused on work, which is unfortunate. A lot of people kind of use, they'll say they work long hours and they work really hard, and they carry that as a badge of honor. And I'm like, well, that's kind of not a badge of honor. That's kind of silly, in my opinion. working too much, all right, that builds up stress. You get burnout a little quicker, and ultimately the quality of your work decreases, okay? But fortunately, I work for a company that understands this and practices this, and they encourage us to maintain this nice work-life balance, and I encourage you to do the same. So, I also don't know everything, all right? And I never will. I can't. There's just too much out there. I recognize that a lot of you here in the audience know far more than I do about certain subjects. And what I want to tell you is that a lesson I've learned is that humility, is a very important trait as you become a better and better developer. All right, your job as a senior developer on your team is not to know everything. All right, your job is to facilitate answers and to help ultimately solve a problem. All right. So if that means that the answers to a certain question come from you, that's great. But if they don't come from you, that's still fine too. I mean, it's your job to help facilitate those answers, not have them necessarily. Okay. And one way you can facilitate those answers is to delegate to your team. All right, your team members are going to have those answers sometimes when you don't. All right, so it's often appropriate to delegate tasks, when you can. All right, you should use your team. All right. So I trust my team at New Media Campaigns. All right, I'm in charge of all the technical development. My job title there, which is a fun title I made up, is Special Projects Director. If any of you read Clive Cussler, you'll understand where that's from. But I understand that each person on my team has a unique specialization. They all bring certain knowledge and skills to the table, whether or not they're advanced or they're newer. I appreciate that each of them has their own special skills, right? And so I try and take advantage of that. And as a senior developer, it's also a good way, specifically for newer members on your team, is to kind of delegate tasks that are appropriate for them, and it really gives them some ownership in the project and investment in the project, and that makes them feel a part of the team, right? So it's a good way to kind of help your team improve and elevate everybody. Now, working smarter helps you avoid burnout, and I can honestly speak about this firsthand, all right? Specifically when I was working on the Slim framework. So Slim I love Slim. Like I built it originally through 0.1 all the way to version 1 and to version 2. And then some of you may know that there was a little bit of a hiatus between version 2 and version 3. And that's when I was getting a little burnt out. This the negativity from just the general community, which is typical for a lot of open source software development, just kind of weighed down on me a little bit, and so I kind of withdrew a little bit from the project. But luckily, I was able to had a good support team behind me, and I was able to trust them and use them. And again, that was Andrew Smith and most recently Rob Allen and a lot of other contributors as well. So by trusting my team, I was able to kind of walk back from the project a little bit, and I still am to this day, and instead kind of follow my interest where they were going. So I'm focusing a little bit more on my day job now. Laurel and I are having a great time doing photography, but it just helps keep you sane. So work smart, trust your team, and try and avoid burnout when possible. So this is probably the most important lesson that I want to share today, and this is that your people, your team members are your most valuable assets on your project, on any project. Okay. And one thing, the best thing that you can do when you're working with your team is to give them praise. All right, a little bit goes a long way. I know this. When I was a beginner and I first joined New Media Campaigns, like you're really unsure of what's going on. You don't know if you're doing a good job or not, and you don't really have a lot of confidence starting out. So as a senior developer, as a team leader, I strongly encourage you to just, if someone does a good job, let them know, like just a small thank you or good job, great idea. Just a little bit goes a really long way to building confidence. And you're not patronizing them. You're not. I mean, they are valuable and they are doing a good job, and you should really let them know. I mean, they'll greatly appreciate it. And another thing I want to talk about is that you should not punish mistakes. They're inevitable. They are going to happen. And if you talk to any of my coworkers at New Media Campaigns, they will be more than happy to tell you that I have made plenty of mistakes. And I probably always will continue to make a lot of mistakes. But they are inevitable, and it's your job as a senior developer to recognize that and to kind of to recognize that. You should anticipate them. Right? When you're starting a project, you should anticipate these mistakes. Take the opportunity to learn from them when they do happen, and then don't repeat them. All right? But most importantly, don't punish them. They're a really good opportunity for your team members to learn. So one funny example, and this was earlier on at New Media Campaigns. This was before we had adopted version control. This was before we were doing stricter, more rigid deployments and continuous integration testing. We were live editing our code directly on the production server. You should not do that. But when we were doing that, we were moving very quickly, and I was working on this site, and I was trying to debug this really difficult problem, which I eventually solved, and then I just saved the code on the production server, and then the site went down. And I was like, oh no. So I went back and looked, and I had accidentally left one of a die comment in the code on the production server that I'd forgotten to take out after debugging. So that was a mistake that I made. It's kind of funny in hindsight, but what came of that is that I did learn from that. As a company, we learned from that, and we've since adopted version control using GitLab. GitLab is amazing, by the way. You should check it out. And we are doing a lot more continuous integration testing so that when we do push up code, we have some tests that run automatically and will let us know if it fails for any reason. And otherwise, we have a more rigid Capistrano-based deployment setup. So we learn from these mistakes that we've made. They're inevitable, so anticipate them, learn from them, and try not to repeat them. And a very important thing that you as a senior developer are responsible for at your company or your team or your user group or whatever is that you should encourage good practices. All right, you need to lead by example. But how I'm doing that is at work, a lot of the developers that we have on the team, I'd say probably about a third of them are newer. And I'm trying to help them introduce them to the new PHP standard recommendations from the FIG, the Framework Interop Group. And it currently, at this point in time, it's more of I'm suggesting it to them. I'm kind of gradually encouraging them to use these new coding styles, PSR1 and PSR2 in their code, because these help all of our developers kind of easily read and comprehend the code. And eventually, I plan to try and become a little bit more enforce this a little bit more with some continuous integration tests. And another good way that we encourage good practices at our work is we have a weekly meeting with our developers, and every week one developer gets to share something cool that they've learned. And Adam Fairholm, who works with us, who was a tech reviewer for Modern PHP, he shared something about WebVR, which was and again, it's something that I was unaware of. But it was just really cool that I learned something new, right? So that's another good way that you can help share good information and good practices is just kind of like a weekly meeting like we do. This is a small one, but an important one, all right? It's not obvious, all right? And it's really easy as a senior developer to kind of take things for granted. I'm definitely guilty of this. Because you tend to build up a large amount of knowledge, you think you know a lot, and you assume that others do too, all right? But that's not the case. That's not the case. And so you should really avoid using this word at all. You should not use it at all right? Now, I'm guilty of this. Like in the first printing of Modern PHP, I don't know if this made it to the Chinese translation or not, but I did use the word obviously in the first printing. And after I got my copy in the mail, I was like, oh no, I shouldn't have used that. And so in the second printing, I went back and removed that word because I don't like to use it. And another good thing that you can do for your team is to help them continuously learn, all right? You should be hiring people to begin with who enjoy learning, but you should also help them and encourage them to continuously do so, because there's always going to be something new to learn. That's a blessing and a curse for being a PHP developer. But you should help them learn, and by doing that, you can help them get books. You can encourage them to go to conferences like we are here today. You can encourage them to go to their local user groups, and if they don't have one, start a user group. That's what I did in Chapel Hill. The user group at the time was like down in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is about an hour away given traffic, and I just couldn't make it out. So and there was a lot of other people like me, so we started our own user group in Chapel Hill, and now we're up to about 20 people that come out every month. So it's a lot of fun. And if you can't do that, if you don't want to start your own, Nomad PHP, if you haven't heard about that, please check it out. It's by the great Cal Evans. He runs these, I believe, once a month, once in Europe, once in America, and they have a guest speaker every month that comes out and talks about something really neat. Something else you can do. As a senior developer, I've learned that it's extremely important to welcome feedback. Like I said, I'm not infallible. Like I make mistakes. At New Media, I'm responsible for building our internal workflows for like local development, Vagrant VMs, and then the deployment process to production. And so I build out a lot of these tools and I build out a lot of these workflows. But it's just me who's building those. But there's a whole team of people using them. So I tell every member of my team, no matter how new they are or how experienced they are, your feedback is always welcome, and it always should be. All right, because there's always going to be something that I forgot or I didn't think about, and they're the ones who are really using this day to day, and so they have the most experience and the ability to kind of tell me and give me feedback. So welcome feedback. All right. And so lesson 4, all right, lesson 4, keep it simple, all right? This is my favorite cliche of all time, but it's true. It's true. And this applies directly to your PHP code. Now, I strongly encourage you, when you're writing PHP code, is to keep it as simple as possible, all right? Because the fact is, you're never really writing PHP code for yourself, all right? You're not. All right, you're writing PHP code for others, right? Your team, all right? Or if you leave your team, who's the remaining people on your team who are left with your code? If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, like who's going to be taking it over? And then even your future self, right? So like when I revisit code that I wrote a year ago or even a month ago, I'm like, oh man, who wrote this? So keep your code very simple, all right? As a result, it's obviously going to be easier to understand. All right, and it's going to be easier to debug. All right, so keep your code very simple. Now, I've worked with several PHP developers who are extremely smart, and they try and reflect that in the code they write. So they write this very terse, brilliant, very fast, very efficient code, but I struggle to kind of comprehend what's actually happening. So keep it simple. Keep it simple. Your future self will thank you. All right, believe me. So another way to keep it simple is at work. Like I said, I'm responsible for a lot of the technical development. Whenever I'm choosing tools specifically for client projects, I have 3 criteria that I keep in mind. Okay, number 1, I want it to be boring. All right. Number 2, it needs to be predictable. All right. And number 3, it needs to be reliable, all right? So boring, predictable, and reliable, all right? I hate surprises, all right? So that's why these are my main 3 criteria at work. So like I said, boring and reliable I use for client work. Anything that pays the bills, puts food on the table, that's the criteria I use. But, I still want to have time to learn, the newer things coming out. So the new and shiny stuff I keep for internal projects when I have time to make mistakes, right? And run over schedule. Another thing about keeping it simple, I love this article. Some of you may have already read this, but it's by Joel Spolsky, the CEO of Stack Overflow, and it's called "Don't Let Architecture Astronauts Scare You." There's some strong opinions on either side of this. Some are for this, some are not so much in favor of this article, but it does have a lot of good ideas. It encourages you to really start as simple as possible when you're building projects. It says not to abstract and optimize and try to scale your project before you need to do that. So kind of start with a minimum viable product, and then worry about abstraction and optimization and scaling as you come to that, right? This also talks a little bit about like design patterns. And at my Chapel Hill user group recently, a person came up to me and asked me, do I need to know these design patterns? Should I be using these design patterns in all of my projects? And I was like, well, I mean, you should be aware of the design patterns. You should be aware of them. You should know them. You should know what they do and when they're useful. But don't feel like every single line of code that you write has to adhere to a design pattern. Right? That's not the case. So a real-world example at New Media Campaigns, we about a year ago, 2 years ago, I wrote this article, this blog post on using Docker for local PHP development. Some of you may have read it. And that was in the middle of when we were experimenting both with Docker or Vagrant for local development. And we ended up using Vagrant, okay? And why did we use that? Why did we use Vagrant? Well, Docker is a great tool, but I still think it's still immature, in my personal opinion. It changes very quickly, and so that's something that we just, by the time we learned it's a way to use it, it had changed, and it's pretty difficult to manage in production. Now that's improving daily now. Google is making some great progress on container orchestration. But it's still a little more complex than what we needed in-house at New Media Campaigns. So we chose Vagrant. Vagrant's a little bit older. I believe it's a bit more proven, and it changes relatively infrequently compared to Docker. And it also supports Ansible too, which we use to provision all of our in-house virtual machines. And another example of kind of my criteria, boring, predictable, and reliable, is Capistrano. This tool has been around for a long time, especially in the Ruby community. I believe it was originally meant for deploying Ruby on Rails applications. But what Capistrano is, it's a Ruby gem you can install, and all it does is issue SSH commands across a set of remote machines. So, like I said, originally it was meant for deploying Ruby applications, but we're using it to deploy our in-house PHP applications. And if any of you have read Modern PHP, there's a section on deployments with Capistrano, and I call it, simple, reliable, and reversible. The last one being the most important part. And by having a really structured deployment process, using an older, reliable tool like Capistrano, it's really taken the fear out of our in-house deployments. And so, even the other day, I was working with our project manager who doesn't touch code, and he was able to actually make a change and deploy it with this. And so I was really proud of that. And so, wrapping up with lesson 5, is sharing your knowledge. That's why I'm here today. Being up here is pretty scary. I'll be honest with you. But I strongly encourage you to get out and share your knowledge. Now, you don't necessarily need to be up here in front of 300 people, but I encourage you to do it. Whether it's just with your team, whether it's with your coworker, your local user group, right? Share your knowledge. It's very important. And you can share it with your team. Okay, this helps each team member improve. All right, and that's kind of your job as a senior developer, is to kind of help the newest members of your team kind of get up to speed and become better. And as a result, the entire team benefits. So I saw this tweet a few days ago, actually, from Nomad PHP, and they say that it's often better, paraphrasing, it's often better to hire a junior developer and train them in-house to become a senior developer, as opposed to just hiring a senior developer straight out. And I firmly believe that this is kind of a true statement. And this is also, by, again, sharing your knowledge with your team can make this happen. With your user group, all right? User groups are really fun. If you're not a member of a user group, you really should, all right? It's a great way to meet other PHP developers, have fun, and learn something about PHP. This is a picture of us at the Chapel Hill PHP user group. This is the New Media offices, and we basically just meet after work. We get some pizza, get some drinks, spend about 30, 40 minutes just talking, seeing what everybody's up to, what's new. And then we have a guest speaker come in once a month. And it's a lot of fun. It really is. So I strongly encourage you to, if you can find your local user group, go do it. And you can look it up at, I believe, php.ug. I think that's the right URL. You can find your user group. All right, and with your networks, right, contribute to the organic distribution of knowledge. It's a little fancier than I was trying to get, but yeah, you get the point. Is to share your knowledge online. Okay, someone is going to find it useful. An example of this, I was working on a Drupal website recently, and I had a CSV file of like 3,000 URLs to import as URL redirects from the old site to the new site. And so I imported this file into Drupal, and apparently 500 of them failed because of some bad URL encoding. But fortunately, the output of that error message gave me the specific line numbers in the CSV, but the problem was they were randomly distributed across the entire 3,000 line CSV file. So I was like, how in the world am I gonna I don't want to go one by one and pick these things out. And so I Googled around, and I found this really helpful sed command. So I basically took the line numbers that Drupal gave me, concatenated it into this command, piped in the original CSV, and wrote the results to the output CSV, and it gave me a really quick way to isolate those specific redirects, which I was able to fix. Now, some of you may already know this, but I found it, it was new and novel to me. It was really cool, and so I shared it. And granted, it did not go viral by any means, but I know that at least 9 people found this helpful, so that's something I encourage you to do. And also with open source, I care a lot about open source. I work with a Slim Framework project, PHP The Right Way, and I really encourage you, if possible, to give back to these projects if you can. Of course, financially if you want, but it's not required. I would strongly encourage you, though, to kind of contribute your time or your knowledge to these projects instead. And I know it's difficult if you feel like you're more of a beginner or you're not confident enough to really dive into the code on these projects. Documentation is an excellent way to introduce yourself and to help out. Every single project needs better documentation, right? So just reach out to the project maintainer and just ask how you can help get involved. So remember, PHP, all right, is only a tool. There are a lot of tools, okay? You have macro frameworks, micro frameworks, and individual components. Recognize that these exist. Try not to devote yourself to one of them, right? Be aware that multiple tools exist, and you can use those to solve a problem. Same thing with languages. PHP is just one language, right? It can be one part of the solution, all right? Number 2, work smart, not hard, all right? Try and keep a healthy work-life balance so you can keep your sanity. Try and get outside once in a while, all right? Avoid burnout. Delegate when you can. Number 3, your people are by far, all right, your best assets, all right? Give praise when appropriate, all right? Try not to punish mistakes, all right? They're gonna happen. Encourage them to keep learning, and always welcome feedback from them. 4, keep it simple. All right, you hear this a lot, but it's really true. All right, you're always writing code for other people. All right, including your future self. All right, so keep it simple, and as a result, it'll be easier to understand and easier to debug. All right, and finally, as we just talked about, try and share your knowledge with your team, with your user group, online, with open source. And that's it. That's more than code. All right. These things have helped me. I hope they help you. All right. Thank you.